Hello, everyone. We are live once again. I understand that there might be a slight delay to how quickly this goes live. So before I start bringing on a number of people to introduce various, before I bring in Dean and I bring in Jeff, I'm just going to sort of wait a few moments to make sure that that we are indeed live. I can see that there are 61, 62 attendees now. If someone wants to type a quick hello, just let me know that you can hear and we're ready to start running here. Hi. Okay, John. Good. Okay, good. We're all running.
Hey, John. How's it going?
Good.
Yep. I'll need to grab that integration token from you again.
Okay, sure. Okay. There you go.
Thank you.
So I'm going to now introduce Dean Melway.
Sorry, I don't have that.
Okay, is this Ally Coordinator or Ally Captionator that's talking?
This would be a Media Coordinator.
Okay, one moment, please. Did you get it that time?
I did, thank you.
Okay, perfect, thank you. So Dean, I'd like to bring you in now to introduce Jeff Willbond, Dean Melway of the READ Initiative and the chair of Enable Ottawa 2020. Take it away, Dean.
Thank you, John, and thank you for a great start. We've had a great start to the 3 days and really looking forward to all the talks. For me personally, looking forward to Jeff. Jeff is a very good friend and colleague, and I've watched his career since when his younger days we were playing sledge hockey together, and I watched the impact he's made. He started at the local level in Ottawa and made some great strides there, then went to the province and made some even better strides there with the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities organization, and then he moved to the federal government, and we kept crossing paths all the way along, but it's always been a pleasure to follow his progress. And the one thing about Jeff, and now in his role with Canada Post, is he knows how to make a difference. So I'm really looking forward to hearing the story that Jeff is about to present to us. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you kindly, Dean. There we are. It's actually a privilege to be part of the event, and happy National Accessibility Week to everyone. Dean and I have known each other for many years, and Dean, you are certainly a good friend and you have been a mentor. I have certainly learned a lot from the community that we've all been part of and working together. And I'm just thrilled to be part of this event, because this event, again, is another example of inclusion, of how we can make things accessible. And so well done to the READ Initiative, well done to you, Dean, and your team, John Moore, Moira, Boris, anyone that was involved in putting this together. And so I'm just here to share my humble experience and my journey with Canada Post since I joined Canada Post, which is a large Crown corporation, in really looking at not only making that company more accessible in terms of its services and it becoming an employer of choice, but also how Canada Post can contribute to a more accessible Canada. So, it's interesting too, because here we are, we're kind of living through a pandemic, COVID-19. No one would have ever thought that we would have experienced this in our lifetime, but here we are. And, it's interesting because when you think of large employers, when you think of, the government of Canada or municipalities or Crown corporations or the private sector, employer obligations haven't changed because people are working now remotely, but people are being much more productive at home. And, it's in the best interest for employers to continue accommodating and ensuring that we've got good accessibility. And in fact, I would say that in some ways, this pandemic has accelerated accessibility because we're all being accommodated. We're all working from home. We've all tested new technology, new tools, to continue being connected to our community life, to our families, to work. And you know what? I'm a strong believer that productivity should not be measured on how hard we work, but it's about working smarter. And you know what? Accessibility helps us to work smarter. And when I came to Canada Post almost 2 years ago, it's an interesting story because they came knocking on my door when I was at the Government of Canada, and I didn't take it seriously at first. I thought it was one of those kind of, marketing, LinkedIn, just through social media. And I got a call, and I actually said to the person, "No, thanks. I'm happy where I am." And then a day went by, and I got another call from this recruiter saying to me, "No, Jeff, Canada Post is really serious. They want to talk to you about leading accessibility for Canada Post." And so I thought, okay, well, I'll go and hear them out, and I'll go and meet with the company. And here I am 2 years later. But I can tell you, when I had those initial discussions, I immediately recognized their commitment to creating a more accessible and inclusive Canada. It was really genuine. It was authentic. And I thought, you know what? Here's a place that I could bring my 25 years of experience, with respect to public policy, community development, inclusion and human resources, because here's a company that can actually really influence change within Canadian society, because we can't do this in isolation. We all have to work together, whether it's public, private, crown corporations. So, I've been pleased ever since. We've been making some great progress, and we've been demonstrating some leadership, and we are not working alone. We're working with a number of different organizations at the local and national level. And Dean mentioned earlier that we played sledge hockey. So I guess I'm going to start to show my age, because I was born with a disability, and I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, and I've seen an evolution in terms of accessibility, as many of us have experienced. And so in the 70s, there was much segregation, and there was a lot of learning with respect to shifting from a medical model to a social model. And in the 80s, we were starting to talk a little bit more about accessibility and integration. And then the 90s, we were starting to talk a little bit more about improving accessibility, and recognizing the importance of, the contribution that everyone makes in society, to today talking about inclusion. So it's been quite an evolution, just in terms of the rights movement as well of persons with disabilities around legislation and policy, going from employment equity to the AODA to the Accessible Canada Act that we have today. And some would say that, it's long overdue to have federal legislation, but you know what? There's no time like the present, and the Act actually provides a really good framework for all of us to look at the direction that we need to take to address those systemic issues that we see in community life. So I just want to talk a little bit about, really it's the journey that I've had with Canada Post and the work that I've done over the years. But accessibility has been historically overlooked. And accessibility, as we know, refers to a wide range of services and technologies that enable people with disabilities to participate more fully in all aspects of life. Today, I want to break down my presentation into 3 areas. I want to talk about, understanding your organization or the industry that you're trying to achieve accessibility in. And of course, working for Canada Post, a large crown corporation, I'm going to share that industry perspective. I also want to talk about considerations for the approach to accessibility. And lastly, I want to talk about improving accessibility through a strategy. So let's begin, and let's look at understanding your industry. So for me, right away I knew that working at Canada Post, I wasn't necessarily going to be addressing transportation or telecommunications, but I was going to be looking at program service delivery, employment policy, customer service, digital, communications, technology. But I think it's important for organizations to really kind of understand the industry that they're in and how does accessibility apply to that industry. So a little bit about Canada Post. I don't know if some of you know this, but it's probably, well, I think it's one of the oldest companies in Canada. Canada Post actually goes back 250 years, believe it or not, before Canada was a country, was a nation, because the postal movement, has been around for a long, long time. And it is a Crown corporation, which has a very interesting mandate. So it's got a mandate to provide public service, but at the same time, it has to be sustainable financially and generate revenue. So there is a private sector component to the company. The company doesn't receive funding from the Government of Canada. In fact, the Government of Canada is a shareholder of Canada Post. So we serve, we provide services coast to coast to coast. We have almost 16 million residential addresses, and we have 1 million business addresses that we've been serving as of 2018. In addition, we've got, and this is an interesting statistic, we've got 6,100 post offices right across the country. We more than double McDonald's and Tim Hortons put together. So I always like to mention that, because that's just to show you the size and the scope of the company. Canada Post is also a proud enabler and innovator in Canada's e-commerce space. So when you look at, today, parcel delivery, it's not about letter mail necessarily, or it's not about, neighborhood mail. It really is about the world of Amazon. During the pandemic, most people have received goods and services through Canada Post. When you go to purchase something online, when you need medication, when you need whatever is essential, that's the world of e-commerce. That's the new world of delivery. I talked a little bit about, understanding accessibility for your organization. So, Canada Post understands that, to apply accessibility in our company, it's about the designing of products and policies. It's about the built environment. It's really about inclusive by design and accessibility by default. And I'm sure you've heard that before. I didn't come up with that. I have to say that, that is really the Government of Canada, and it's a brilliant statement when you start to look at, accessibility being the vehicle towards inclusion. So why is accessibility important to Canada Post? Well, it's a natural extension of who we are. I told you that we're a large company right across the country, and we are more than 50,000 employees. And that means we are 50,000 Canadians who meet the needs and connect millions of Canadians. And the more accessible we are, the more we can connect Canadians and the more we can serve Canadians. I want to talk a little bit about the evolving customer needs, because that is really paramount. I mean, customer service is probably the most important thing in everything that we do, within society, community life, whether it's, education, healthcare, the private sector. So when we look at the changing demographics, we already know that, according to the 2017 Canadian survey, there's roughly 25% of Canadians that have identified having a disability. The prevalence of disability among Canadians tends to increase with age, and women are more likely to have disability than men. The most common types, of course, of disability are mobility, sensory, mental health, and for youth, mental health related disability is actually increasing and becoming more common. At Canada Post, there's a recognition and an appreciation that with these changing demographics, we need to put an emphasis on inclusive services and programs. One of the things that we looked at was research, knowing how the industry leaders are becoming more accessible, knowing how other companies are doing. And so we looked internationally, and for example, Australia Post has a very comprehensive accessibility action plan. And of course, Australia, in a lot of ways, is very progressive in terms of how they treat their citizens, all citizens, and really strive towards inclusion. We looked at local companies in Canada like Microsoft, who've used disability as an engine of innovation for inclusive inventions. So they recognize that by employing a diverse group of employees within their company, diversity is the driver to innovation. The other thing that I wanted to touch on was the considerations for an approach to accessibility. So one of the things that I really spent a lot of time doing at Canada Post early on was to socialize the importance of my work and looking at the key drivers. So I knew that as a Crown corporation, service delivery and the customer experience was paramount. I knew that there had to be a business case, and there had to be what's right for Canadians. And then lastly, the legal case. And that's the last thing that I always come to, because I think it's important to have that legal case in the background, the Accessible Canada Act and human rights, the charter, but it shouldn't be at the forefront. It should be a backdrop. Really what's important is the business case and the moral case. So the business case for Canada Post was that the better that we improve our services and delight our customers, the better that we can become a more sustainable company. And that we know that from an employer perspective, 59% of Canadians with disabilities are employed, compared to 80% of the Canadian population without disability. That's pretty significant. And we want to change that number. We want to, again, become an employer of choice, to lead the way, to demonstrate that, you know, your recruitment strategies, the way we onboard, the way that we retain employees needs to be different. And again, this pandemic is an example of, again, how we're accommodating a large workforce and everyone to continue being engaged to the workplace. Customer impacts are really important. Customers also want to be empowered, and they want to make their own decisions with regards to purchases. And Deloitte found that 50% of customers are influenced to making a purchase because the company's commitment to gender, disability, diversity, and culture. So the bottom line is not just what the bottom line used to be about making money. The bottom line needs to include the corporate responsibility of what we're doing for Canadian society, what we're doing to improve the quality of life for all Canadians. And then obviously there is the financial impact. Companies that make diversity a real priority not only meet the legislative obligations, but also are 70% more likely to capture new markets, have 19% higher revenues, customer satisfaction. And then what I talked about earlier was the last piece of that, those three cases, the human rights and the legal case. So when you talk about human rights, the moral case, not only is it not nice, but it's not legal. And that's why we've got the Accessible Canada Act to complement, moving in that healthier direction. The one thing that I spent a lot of time in the first year in terms of doing the work that I'm doing right now at Canada Post was achieving sustainable culture change. I wanted senior management within the company to recognize that this is not the flavor of the month. This is not something that's trending right now that's going to go away. It's imperative to find ways to embed accessibility into the organization's DNA. For example, I looked at the core values. I looked at what was driving leadership at Canada Post. What was on the minds of senior leaders? How can I identify champions at the most senior level at Canada Post to really be accountable and to be my support? Because I'm one person. I've got a team now, of course, but it's not just about the Jeff Willbonds and other advocates that are going to make a difference. It's about creating that collective. It's about creating a larger community, a movement, if you will, and that needs to be done by those without disabilities. And so having champions within an organization and that commitment, that leadership is absolutely important. The other thing that I'm really proud of, and Dean Melway is a member of, is that we have a National Accessibility Advisory Panel for Canada Post. And why that's important is that, yes, you never want to consult alone. You never want to consult in isolation. I think whenever we look at any kind of business, whenever we look at services and programs, we've heard Minister Qualtrough say nothing about us without us, or nothing without us. Having that body of experts providing advice is so important. It's so rich. And so there's a group of individuals, not only with lived experience sitting on that accessibility advisory panel, but those are individuals that represent different sectors within the community that can bring in a different perspective, a different insight into a company, so that a company can really help to grow and really become diverse. We know that disability is a dimension of diversity. So it really requires a different lens, and we really value our panel for helping us along the way, along the journey. We felt that, there's companies that have gone out there and they've hired a consultant, for example, to help their organization become more inclusive or more accessible. And that's great. There's a lot of merit in that. But I really think that companies that set up and dedicate resources within the company and have centers of expertise, or a strong team of people with lived experience and expertise, will really carry you much further than having that person who comes into the company as a consultant give you a plan and a strategy and then away you go. It needs to be steadfast. You need someone in the company that is going to can keep the dialogue going, keep the advice and guidance going, keep the conversation going. And the only way you can do that is by being within the company. And one of the other things that I thought was really successful for Canada Post recently was its recruitment efforts. Really looking at becoming, creating an inclusive workplace, really looking at the workforce differently and the workplace differently, taking risks, trying strategies that we've never done before, changing our processes, because sometimes processes, can become habitual, and you can develop an unconscious bias within an environment, within a company, within an institution, that sometimes you don't realize that your own processes and policies have created systemic barriers to, to truly becoming diverse. One of the things that we looked at was building the capacity. We have a large footprint. I mentioned earlier that we've got over 6,000 post offices across the country. We've also got over 1,000 facilities, processing plants, depots, administrative buildings. So one of the things that was equally as important as looking at the change culture piece in terms of human resources was to look at the real estate people, the people that manage property, the people that manage facilities, and really equip them and give them the capacity to understand universal design, to understand how to go beyond building code, which is the minimal standard. And that's the starting point. But the Accessible Canada Act, provides again the spirit and the intent to really go beyond the minimal threshold. We've got an amazing digital technology team at Canada Post of experts that are really looking at, not only just WCAG compliance, so not just looking at WCAG AA compliance, but really looking at, bringing in a user experience perspective, a model that allows us to look at our digital products, our web, how people are interacting with Canada Post in a non-physical way. Again, really tapping into people with lived experience and having a diverse kind of a group of individuals provide input into the company. So research groups, testing groups. I have to say the digital team, in the spirit of this conference, over the next couple of days, looking at technology and assistive devices, there's a team that I'm really proud of in terms of the work that they've done. We've set out a roadmap, if you will. So over the next few years, we really want to improve the digital, the digital experience at Canada Post. Lastly, I just want to talk about the importance of a strategy. So, when you want to improve accessibility, it's got to be done in an action way. There's got to be an action plan. There has to be, the setting of objectives towards that sustainable change. So while you're making social change, you have to show that low-hanging fruit. So identify short and long-term goals and projects and actions that are underway. So in my first 3 or 4 months at Canada Post, I looked for where's the greatest need and where can I make the greatest impact right now, just to get some momentum, to demonstrate again to the company and to the lines of business and to all of the colleagues that I work with that it's doable. And not only is it doable, but it is going to change our world in a very positive way. So having those short-term and long-term goals and having ways to measure those changes, whether again it's the built environment or it's employment policy or it's around your digital world, you have to have really good ways of measuring change and progress so that we can share that and engage others and like I said, model some change. We have an amazing accessibility page on the Canada Post website. And that's something that, speaks to the public and says, hey, this is what we're doing. This is what we're committed to doing. And that's evergreen. That page will evolve. We'll continue to add more information as the company and services become more accessible. And what an easy way to report change as per the Accessible Canada Act. So when we have standards coming into place and regulations, there is going to be that compliance, and that compliance will ask that companies that are mandated under the Accessible Canada Act demonstrate through reporting the changes that they're making. It was really important to set a baseline and conduct audits and take stock and get the level of accessibility in the company to know where we need to go. And that's part of that action plan, that strategy. And that helps you to look at those short-term and long-term goals as you're changing culture. Perhaps what I might do is I'll stop there because I understand that you had a phenomenal presentation earlier by Maya and Siv, and I do appreciate that. Sometimes we don't always have a lot of time for questions and answers, but I'd like to stop here because to me, this is not the typical kind of presentation that I do. I usually like to do interactive presentations where, I engage the audience and we can all have good dialogue. So perhaps I will turn it back over to John, and maybe we can take some questions if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks again, Jeff. It's been a pretty good presentation so far. It's always nice to have panelists give some time for questions. So we've got a few that sort of connect together. So, for example, we've got Brent asking if Canada Post hires people with disabilities, and we've got Teresa asking if Canada Post accommodates people who need attendance services at work. I think both of those sort of connect together.
Correct. Yes, so absolutely. As I mentioned earlier in my presentation, we are really moving towards, some people would call it special measures, and that's where, your representation can be sometimes low. And I'll be honest with you, at Canada Post, the representation of people with disabilities and Indigenous peoples is well below the labor market availability. I know we're not alone. There's a lot of organizations that have that kind of data. But having that kind of data has really driven us to really look at our our recruitment practices. So are we doing enough outreach? Are we connecting with communities that can, connect us to really qualified candidates with different abilities? And so last year we started to recruit students through our summer student hiring of persons with disabilities. And ongoingly, we're looking for any opportunity to hire persons with disabilities. So what we're doing is, of course, it's always merit-based when you look at recruitment. So it's kind of matching the right person up with the right job. But where it's important when it comes to being accessible and inclusive is that we don't want to have any barriers for someone who's going to join the company. We don't want to have any barriers for someone to even apply for a job and go through the testing process or the interview process. So in answer to that question, yes, that we are hiring. We're open to hiring everyone. What we're doing right now and where we're learning more and more is where are the barriers so that we can immediately remove them. So it's one thing to go out to the communities across the country and identify where we might find candidates. And again, if we're talking about hiring of people with disabilities, you know, we've even had some great help from Carleton University here in Ottawa, you know, to do that. That's one thing. The other thing is that when we bring, you know, employees into the company, we don't want to have barriers. We want to be able to retain that employee, because it's one thing to bring an employee in, but if they're not fully engaged in the workplace, then those efforts were a waste of time. So in answer, yes, we are. It's coming along. We are moving at a pace that, you know, so that we can do it right. Obviously, the pandemic has you know, COVID-19 has created a bit of a barrier for us. But even at that, you know, we need to start figuring out how we can continue to hire virtually, how we can continue to provide an orientation virtually, so that, you know, if someone doesn't physically come into the office, it should not stop you from hiring.
Great, thanks, Jeff. There's an interesting comment that we have here from someone. Tim has asked, would Canada Post consider the delivery of emails as spoken text to the partially sighted or by mail for those who do not have access to a computer but could have a special email address, such as at Canada Post?
Oh, wow. That is a great idea.
Kind of a neat one, isn't it? Yeah.
It's a very neat idea. I'm wondering if I shared my contact information with you, John, if Tim and I could take that offline.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. And just to let you know, we're hitting we've got about 16 or 17 open questions at the moment. So
Sure.
We might not get to all of those, but I have, as with Mayan, what I'd like to do as well is take those offline and sort of share those with you. And then we'll share the answers back to everyone that answers.
That'd be my pleasure. Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, great
no
idea,
problem.
John. Thank you.
So let's see. We've got one here. Andrea has asked, she liaises with her accessibility advisory committee, and they can't meet in person these days. They meet via teleconference. And with an advisory panel all across Canada, what format do you use for your meetings, and what do you have in place to ensure meetings are accessible? What's worked best for your group?
Okay, so quickly, before our circumstances now, so before the pandemic, the advisory panel would meet twice a year in person for 2 days. So we would have 2 days of discussions and you know, various presentations that Canada Post would deliver in order to seek advice from the panel. Now that we are not able to meet in person, our next meeting is in the fall, and we will be, you know, kind of organizing a virtual, accessible meeting in order to maintain that engagement. So similar to how we're meeting right now and how we're having this Enable Ottawa event, we will be hosting an accessible panel discussion in the fall virtually. And I really do hope that we can come back to in-person meetings, because that engagement is so important.
Great. I think we have questions. I think we have one more that we can ask if we can make the answer fairly succinct. And that would be Kathy's asking, what would you say to a company just starting out on a journey of accessibility? Where should they start?
Well, I mentioned earlier that research is so important, benchmarking. You know, I would say that a company just starting out, is this a company, sorry, is the question around what can they do to become more accessible?
It looks like it's just saying, sorry, I've answered it. It's gone to another section now.
I'm sorry, John.
Yeah, no, that's fine. She's just saying, what would you say to a company just starting out on a journey of accessibility? Where should they start?
Okay, and that's a brilliant question. Thank you for that question.
Yeah, no problem.
If I go back 2 years ago, and base it on my experience, it's really about aligning yourself with people who have demonstrated that that they've done this, that they've worked in this space. It's about networking. It's about looking at best practices. It's about aligning yourself with like-minded organizations who again can share their experience. So it means doing some research. It means getting out there and knocking on doors and doing research online and really finding out who are those models, who are those examples, and also ensuring that you're talking to the folks that you serve and the folks that you serve with disabilities. So again, even though we have the Accessible Canada Act, which is fairly new, accessibility is not a new subject. It's not a new topic. We've been at this for many, many years. So there are individuals out there, there are champions, there are leaders, and there are organizations that I really feel that when you reach out to them, they're more than willing to share with you their experience and help you as a company starting out to go in the right direction.
Great, thanks. I think we'll call it there. I wanted to thank Jeff for that stellar presentation, and for Dean for introducing and bringing him in. And so once again, guys, we're going to take a break for about, let's say 6 or 8 minutes, somewhere around there. The next session begins promptly at 10 to 4. So that's when we will get underway again. And thanks again to Jeff. And like I said, we'll bring all these other questions to you offline, and you can try to answer as many as you can. I think that would be a great service.
That's great. It would be my pleasure. Thanks, John.
Right, no problem.
Really appreciate that.
Okay, bye-bye, everyone.
All right, good luck, everyone. Thank you.